Negotiators from the United States, Canada and Mexico have wrapped up the first round of talks on the North American Free Trade Agreement. You now better know it as NAFTA. Now, the U.S. says NAFTA is hurting American workers. Mexicans and Canadians say the agreement needs to be modernized. CGTN's Franc Contreras speaks to one company owner in Mexico City.
During the 23 years the North American Free Trade Agreement has been in place, Carlos Sosa's small business, called Q+, has been growing. The company repairs computers for clients including state governments. Under NAFTA, Sosa's small firm began importing other products, like flat-screen televisions assembled in factories along the U.S.-Mexico border. Many companies like Sosa's rely on maquiladora factories that are duty and tariff-free firms which help keep prices down. Under NAFTA, the finished products are sent to the United States, then shipped back to Mexico with no tariffs. Sosa says if the Trump administration ends NAFTA or decides to slap on import tariffs, his prices will rise up to 30%.
I have two worries. One is that maquiladora factories will disappear. They're an incredible source of work for Mexicans. The other is that tariffs could be imposed, raising prices on products entering the United States.
U.S. President Donald Trump argues that NAFTA has been a bad deal for his country and points to the trade deficit with Mexico.
Carlos Sosa knows the U.S. President Donald Trump is worried about the great deficit between the United States and Mexico. Mr. Sosa says Trump has nothing to worry about.
This Mexican small businessman says once Trump sees all the pieces of this economic puzzle, he'll realize the U.S. trade deficit with Mexico is not a problem.
The deficit is real, but it should not worry Trump because foreign capital is constantly entering the United States for investments. It's mainly Chinese. So Trump has a deficit, but he also has technology and the world's largest consumer market, plus a strong market to the south.
Keeping Mexican small businesses strong, Sosa argues, is good for both U.S. suppliers and consumers, and it's good for the entire North American commercial zone. Franc Contreras, CGTN, Mexico City.
Right, then let's dig deeper into exactly how these renegotiations are playing out. Daniel Rangers joins us now live from Washington, D.C. with more data on this. Daniel, good to see you. So let's go back to 1994. CDs were probably just starting to become the in thing, and a lot has changed since then, especially in the world of e-commerce. So how would each of the three parties to this trade deal, once NAFTA, updated to deal with e-commerce?
Well, here's the surprising thing about NAFTA. When it comes to technology, actually the three countries are very liberal. There are very few barriers to trade on technology, particularly on purely cloud-based issues. So, for example, Google or Amazon, they have this global network of data centers and they're always connecting with each other, they're backing up their data, and it's flying around. So US negotiators in particular are going to want some reassurances that that state of affairs will continue. Some talk from Mexico that they might want to impose sort of national boundaries around the movement of data, which could really affect the way in which these technology companies operate. But then some technology companies rely on a lot of hardware. So their interest is more about preventing tariffs from being imposed and also coordinating the way in which they have regulatory systems, safety systems, energy efficiency systems, so that they all line up. And I think the major overarching thing with technology is this. What they want to do is not so much change much of what's already happening, but future-proof. So when new products and new technology comes in, they know that they will be able to rely on liberalized trade, and commitments are going to be sought so that that continues to happen down the line.
Indeed. So speaking of hardware, there's a lot that's been made of this US proposed amendments to rules of origin. That's a particular focus for the Trump administration, but we didn't see any concrete proposals being made in this round of talks. Why is that?
The reason is Donald Trump obviously has this constituency among those who've suffered from globalization, particularly in the lower end manufacturing, the lower skilled end. And of course, from an economic point of view, it makes sense for a middle-income country to make some of those lower-end manufactured products because the wages are lower, and then bring them into the United States. But the big argument is over auto trade. That's one of the big segments whereby there is a major trade deficit with the United States because of that reality. So what happens is some of the parts get made in Mexico, some of them get made in Canada, they cross around a lot, and there are these rules of origin that say that around about 60% of all manufactured goods should be within North America. Now, if you start to tinker with that too much, say you went up to 75%, well, then your costs start to go up, don't they? Because then you can't source some cheaper goods, for example, from Asia. So they have to be very careful around this stuff. And 60% rule of origin is already pretty high. So in reality, it's going to be a lot trickier for them to find a sort of sweet spot in this. Perhaps it's more of a political thing.
Indeed, it should be interesting to see if American consumers, for lack of a better word, would actually want to soak up the extra costs involved. One last thing here. There's about 5 years of work and negotiations that's been sunk into the now dead Trans-Pacific Partnership. Can any of the work done there, since a lot of the parties are pretty much the same, so can any of the work done there be revised to fit whatever final form of NAFTA we do end up with?
Well, Rama, here's the secret sauce to all this. The Trump administration would never say, oh, we're going to take all the stuff that we did with TPP and we're going to apply it to NAFTA. But here's the rub. It's very hard work finding ways to negotiate all of this stuff. It's a huge amount of back and forth between the trade organizations, looking at all the technicalities. It's much easier to say, oh, let's take this off the shelf and put it back into the negotiating pot. Because then they don't have to do much work. They can tinker around the edges. And it's all kind of a menu of items because each individual industrial sector, technology, the movement of goods, intellectual property, they all have already been sort of negotiated. They've already got the language sorted out. So they can pretty much take some of that language and apply it. Obviously, there will be negotiations around some of that stuff. But I think TPP will be underwriting much of the renegotiation of NAFTA.
Indeed, and here we were thinking that TPP is a dead, buried and gone. Thank you for the update. That, of course, is Daniel Rangers there live in Washington, D.C.